Okay, let's bring in CrossFit's competition director, our good friend Adrian Bozman. Boz, thank you so much for doing this today, man. How you doing?
Hey, my pleasure. I am doing well. We're obviously in the thick of the season, and lots going on, but I'm great.
We wanted to talk to you today about quarterfinals moving into semifinals, and then the seeding process and athletes being accommodated and things like that, because there's a lot of talk out there, and we wanted someone to come on and sort of shed some light on what's going on. So I think the first place I wanted to start was pretty simple. And how are athletes seeded out of the quarterfinals?
Well, Sean, I'm glad you asked. It's a very simple process. It's been outlined in the rule book. And I know that, some people seem to be unsatisfied with the language in there, and that's fine. I can understand that critique, but it's really a lot more simple than I think people want to make it out to be. First thing we did was try to distribute rank evenly in North America and Europe, the regions that have multiple semifinals. So obviously you don't want one semifinal that's got a ton of competitive athletes and another region that is less competitive. So that's the first distribution, is by rank. Second, we had a survey that we sent to the athletes if they had any travel conflicts, or there was an absolute no way that they could get to an event, then we would consider that, and then we would look at geography and try to get people that were close to certain regions in that region. Now, that's not always possible, but when we could, we would try to do that. And that's for two reasons. Number one, it benefits the athlete. If they can get there a little bit easier, that's great. And number two, those events, they're always going to benefit from having kind of the hometown hero effect. And it's always great to have local people coming in to support their champions. So it's really that simple. Rank first, travel conflicts, proximity, and that's it. And I think that might not be satisfying to some people because they don't actually get to see the process. But short of sitting over the computer as somebody sorts through that in those three metrics, I'm not sure what else people want. But that is the process. It is that simple.
You mentioned an athlete survey that was sent out. I know that's been the case the last 2 years as well. But what did that survey look like this year, and kind of how was it factored in?
Yeah, before the invites are sent out officially, we take a look at the top qualifiers and those a little bit further down the list that, should we have some backfills, they might be in contention, and we send them a survey ahead of time. It's not an official invite. We make that very clear. And this year it just had 3 questions on it. I guess 2 questions and an open field. The first question is, are you aware of any travel restrictions within your country of residence? Yes or no? And the second question was, are you aware of any travel restrictions that would stop you from traveling to the United States or Canada? Yes or no? And then the third was just any other comments. And that was it.
Do you deal with that? This is a yes or no question. I apologize for that. Do you deal with athlete requests and restriction based on where they're seated? So it's top athlete, we'll deal with that person first, and then so on and so forth. Or is there a different process to that?
Yeah, that's an easy one if it's a yes/no question. Is that based on rank? And the answer is no. So after the initial seeding invites went out, based on the information that we gathered with that survey, there were a number of athletes that wrote back to us and said, oh, by the way, there's more information that you should be aware of. And I either have a preference that is strong for me not to be seated in this region, or I cannot get there due to powers outside of my control. And those were the categories that we looked at. It had nothing to do with rank. So for example, if there was somebody that legitimately could not get to their semifinal that they were originally seated in, we would do everything in our power to try to accommodate them elsewhere. And we would try to do that within a relatively close ranking to where they would have been in their other competition. The second category is preference, and there's people that express those preferences strongly, but because there's only so many spots to go around, and because you have to consider the entire field, those were often not able to be accommodated. And again, it didn't have anything to do with rank and everything to do with the category of request. Legitimate, I cannot travel, those take priority. Strong preference, even if it's something that, it'd be a little bit more difficult for the athlete to accommodate, those are a second consideration.
Mm-hmm. And how do you determine, what is, I guess, for lack of a better term, legitimate as far as like, I cannot get there? Because we saw some athletes, get moved, including Mal O'Brien, which is a big name, and that instantly grabs people as the top qualifier out of North America. So what was the process in sorting who does get reseeded and moved and who didn't?
Yeah, I mean, again, it was exactly that. It was hard blocker versus preference. And preference, I mean, some people came back and said, oh, you know what, I've been seeded across a border and, I'd slipped my mind. I don't have a passport. Well, we did some research and we took a look and, it turns out that there's still enough time for those athletes to request a passport and get that together versus somebody else who, for one reason or another, cannot cross the border, for example, a vaccine mandate, something of that nature, where even if they were willing to get vaccine between now and then, it may not be possible for them to go. They would get to the border and be rejected. Those are different scenarios in our opinion, and so they were treated differently.
I was kind of, and I know that we kind of briefly touched on this before, but there's also like some international athletes that have some similar. I don't want to say similar, but it's a travel confliction, but it's also different. I'm just always curious, how do you, right? Because, and I'll say this as well. I feel like sometimes people want it both ways. People
absolutely, yes,
ask for, hey, we want everyone treated the same.
Yeah,
until
except for when it's my spot on the line, and now I want
and then my scenario is unique and deserves discretion accordingly. So I'm curious, how do you sort those as well? Because I mean, like Roman Krenikov's the obvious one.
Sure.
I think Denis Samsonov and Hamza Tarefi are also ones as well.
Yeah, exactly. And we're always looking to create fairness for the field. It probably doesn't feel that way to some athletes because, well, for a few reasons. Number one, when you are directly affected by something, it always feels like that is singling you out. And I think that's just human nature. Secondarily, when we're dealing with competitions that are done primarily online, it heightens that feeling that everything's being done in a vacuum. You don't have the visibility of what's happening to the rest of the field. And so I think that can really create a situation where it feels like there's preferential treatment going on. But no, we do everything we can to make sure that we treat things as categories and apply rules across the board. So in the instance of a few athletes in Asia, that region specifically, because it has one of the broadest ranges of athletes competing from different countries, there were several athletes, several of them in the top 10, who resided in a country outside of the country where the semifinal is being hosted. They had legitimate visa concerns, concerns such as if I leave my country of residence, I might not be able to come back into my country of residence. I mean, that's pretty serious. And so in those instances, we offered some of them a buy into the last chance qualifier should they be unable to attend their semifinal. And that was done in an effort to preserve the fact that these athletes have earned a qualifying spot. They've earned an at-bat, so to speak. And that was a great way that we could give that to them should they not be able to make it to the semifinal event. One thing I'd like to add on that too is that, this season we still have many regions that are affected by COVID. It's obvious that the world is not completely open yet, but we were facing a scenario, and we knew about this going into the semifinals, that it is more than likely that all 10 semifinals were going to run in person. What was likely is that there were going to be a handful of athletes that would be displaced and unable to attend. And so the conversation was, in the lead up to this season, was based around what is the contingency plan. Last year, we had several semifinals that went online and ran online with their qualifying athletes, all competing in a cadre. Because that was unlikely this year, it didn't seem feasible to hold a separate online semifinal with only a handful of athletes that would not be able to attend. That would create a much different scenario for qualification than the rest of the field. And so that's not very fair. So it's unfortunate that those athletes that may not be able to get to their semifinal don't get that opportunity to compete in person. And it is a different path to go to that last chance qualifier. However, it's the best that we could do under the circumstances. And again, moving forward to 2023 and beyond, as we move further and further away from COVID, it's my hope that these types of complications will become further and further from necessary.
When you have to move an athlete, let's use Mal O'Brien as an example. When you have to move her from the Atlas Games to the Granite Games, it's more than just moving her. You have to, there's a domino effect there as far as, well, now we either have to pull somebody out and move that person, and then that goes down the line. How do you work your way through that to keep it as fair as possible for anybody who is affected by an athlete being moved to go into another semifinal, if that makes sense?
Yeah, great question. And it is a bit of a domino is, I don't think that's quite accurate, but you do have to look at the bigger picture. And so what I do is I keep a simple list of all the athletes that have been initially seeded in each region. And that's not something that people may have access to just by following along on what the leaderboards are populated like. But we have all the initial invites that have been sent out in each region. And then if there's declines, I will just cross those off the list. And that gives me a comparative at a glance look of where that rank distribution falls and what athletes are being pulled out or declining from that. And so in the Granite Games scenario with Mal, what was interesting when she wrote and let us know that, she could not make it to Canada and she was requesting to be changed, it was a real conundrum, because at first glance, it's like, well, I don't know that we can accommodate this. There doesn't appear to be a feasible spot for her. But once we took a look at that initial seeding and the declines, we noticed that Olivia Kerstetter, who was also within the top 10 and also seeded to go to Granite, had declined. And that made a pretty obvious place for Mal to end up. So for that reason, it worked out, obviously not perfectly. I don't think anybody would want this to be as confusing as it happened to be, especially seeing Mal seemingly seated in that region and then being switched. Nobody is nobody wants it to be clunky like that. Certainly not us. But it did, like I said, offer a pretty easy choice to include her at the Granite, because there was another top 10 finisher that had declined, and that spot did open up.
It's interesting to hear you say that, because I feel like, I don't know, that sounds weird, and we talked about it a little bit, is people forget sometimes that you, like, on your end, you're trying to make this the best way possible, and you're acting, you're trying to like make this work, and like these are like secondary, tertiary like plans, and you're not trying to, I don't know, like we chatted a little bit before. It seems like there's a lot of bad faith arguments, and that's where I get a little hung up on. I'm not really sure, like, and this is why I think conversations like this are valuable to have, because we're able to get your insight from that process. And that wasn't, I guess, a question or anything like that. But
well, I'll riff on that. I'm happy to take that bounce pass and run with it a little bit. Yeah, I think that is something where, with these distributed competitions where athletes are competing again in kind of the vacuum of their own environment, it can sometimes result in, I call it the knitting circle effect. You have something that either looks a little bit funny, or you don't have all the information and you talk to your friends about it. And next thing you know, there is this rationale for CrossFit being against me or being against the group of athletes. And nothing could be further from the truth. We want the best possible outcome for all of these competitions. We certainly want athletes to be able to show up and do their best. We want the fittest people to be highlighted and moving forward into the stages of competition that they qualified into. I mean, everybody wants the same thing in these scenarios. It is something that does have to be viewed from the big picture. And just like anything else in life, there are situations where one person is going to be affected in a way that seems like it's being singled out. But if you take a step back and you look at it, it's not the case.
Yeah, you mentioned a piece of that too, is like people they don't have the situation where they don't necessarily have all the information. Do you feel like that's an area of improvement moving forward in terms of like being proactive and letting people know where you are in the process? Because I think more than anything else, that's the one thing where it's like, hey, we'll trust where we're going as long as we know where in the trip we are. I think like my family road trips to New Mexico. Like I know we're going to New Mexico, but I'm staring into the vastness. I just need to know where we are and how long.
Like, where's that Best Western on the horizon?
Yeah.
Yeah, I get it. And I think that's a fair critique. I will say that communication is something that I think we have definitely improved. I'm not saying that it's perfect by any stretch, and it is something that the team wants to continue to push, because that is the hardest part from an athlete's perspective is, hey, I don't know what is going to be decided for me, and I have to wait to hear back. Or if you're not just a fan, for example, you might not get that direct line of communication at all, and that's difficult. So I totally hear that critique, and I think that's fair. I also feel that sometimes athletes and fans alike have to take a step back and recognize that, and this is certainly not to say that, you know, like I said, we are actively trying to improve that process always, for sure. However, on the other end of that, like, we live in this age where everybody has a microphone in their pocket that they can blast into the ether. And I mean, that's great. There's all sorts of cool things that come with that. However, it can also breed this belief that just because I put something out there, I should expect a response in a similar time frame that it took me to think this thought and put it on the internet. And when you're weighing considerations against the field of athletes, and there's more, you know, kind of puzzle piecing to do, it's just not possible to respond instantaneously to many of these things. And so it does create a bit of an asymmetry with the expectation of response and the actual time that we can respond. But that being said, yeah, I totally hear that we can do a better job of communicating. And maybe it's just that, hey, we're working on this. The process is going to take some time. You're just going to have to be patient.
Yeah.
Where does the idea of keeping all of these semifinals in North America and Europe competitively balanced fit in to how you move people around to accommodate requests?
I'm not quite sure. I feel like that's the question that you answered,
if there's a,
or that you asked before.
I'm just, so in a traditional seeding process, if you just did it purely based on seeding, you take your 4 top seeds and they'd all go to separate ones. And then the number 2 seeds will all go to separate ones. The number 3 seeds will all go to separate ones. If that makes sense, the next 3. So you'd have some sort of competitive balance. But when you start moving athletes around, you might have one semifinal that has more athletes who are seated inside, let's say, the top 10 than another one. And my response to that is, that's kind of just how sports work. But my question is, how does that consideration of trying to keep a competitive balance, how does that factor into when you look at, okay, we got to move Mal O'Brien now to Granite Games? How does that affect the competitive balance and the top loading, I guess, of that semifinal?
Right.
And what do we need to do to balance that out with now the Atlas Games that is losing a top seeded athlete?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so, you know, I will say that the system is not perfect, and no seeding system is. I think that you can look at any sport, and these types of debates are always being had at every level as to where athletes end up and why. And so, that's not to say that we can't take a look under the hood and try to make it a better process every season. Of course, we should do that, and we'll do that. But again, to use your example, which is right on the money, we take a look at first seed, second seed, third seed, all the way down. And when somebody needed to be made an accommodation for, it was within those bands that we tried to swap whenever possible, so that, to your point, that distribution was not upset significantly. Now, where it gets tricky is obviously if you have a number 1 seed being switched out of a region, you don't exactly have a number 1 seed that can switch in. And so, yes, that does affect the competition. I'll also say on that, it is a bit of an interesting argument, because the seeding out of the quarterfinals, obviously it's a pretty well-rounded test. It's going to reflect where athletes are in that competition, but it doesn't guarantee that rank is representative of what they will do in the next competition. It's a good indicator, but that's why you play the game. So yes, I think, you know, Mal O'Brien being such a high profile athlete and obviously a rising star within the sport, people are going to have all eyes on her. But to take a look at that and say that the Atlas Games now doesn't have a ton of viable athletes in it is crazy. There are so many heavy hitters there still, and it's going to be a great competition.
I have one short question, one medium question, I guess. Just popped in my head. You mentioned like the process of reseeding and moving. Have all the athletes that have had in CrossFit's eyes a legitimate reason why they can't travel? Has that process concluded? Like, at least as far as we've moved all the people that fit in this top tier as far as what is a legitimate reason to be moved?
Yeah, at this point, we've made accommodations for all the athletes that had a barrier to travel that could not be overcome.
Okay. And then the second one was a riff on the Olivia Kerstetter situation, because she's an age group athlete, and we have the age group quarterfinals coming up this weekend. And I think there are, and CrossFit put out an article today about the number of athletes, I think 24 in total, that are age groups that have also qualified for individual semifinals. And the timelines around that are going to be a little tight. What are your thoughts around those timelines? Is there plans to maybe adjust those a little bit? Because it seems like some of the age group athletes, if they decide to switch to age group, the backfill process will be a little tight.
Yeah, absolutely. It's there's a few things kind of hidden in that question there. Number one, hats off to those athletes that qualified in multiple divisions. I mean, that's awesome to have somebody that is in their age group competitive, and they're also able to hang with the top dogs of the sport currently. That's crazy and great. And so, yeah, they had the opportunity to have multiple qualifying competitions via the quarterfinals. However, the season being what it was, you identified that correctly. There are some timing considerations there. If you were an age group athlete and you did get a qualifying spot via the individual quarterfinals, you had to make the decision of taking that individual spot at semifinals or declining it and hoping that you're going to come out competitively in the age group quarterfinals. So yeah, you do have to make that choice. And there's a few things there for this season that just make that something that has to happen. The timing of the online age group semifinals being what it is, it wouldn't be fair for some athletes to be able to compete in that and their in-person semi just by nature of what the schedule shook out for those live events. And therefore, if we can't offer it to everybody, we can't offer it to a few people. And so we decided this season going into it that yes, we would allow athletes to compete in those quarterfinals in as many events as they qualified for, knowing that they would have to make the choice once they got to that semifinal. And yes, the timing is something that they're going to have to consider. But again, they still have those multiple chances. They just have to decide what their best bet's going to be.
Yeah, and I was just curious about the backfill process. Is CrossFit going to try and backfill those last minute? Is it a scenario where like, hey, if you're on the bubble, you just got to stay ready? Since you didn't earn a spot outright and you're waiting for a backfill invite, that's just kind of the nature of the game.
And you're talking the backfill invites for the in-person semis, not the age group semis. Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I'll tell you right now, the spots being what they are and the accept decline dates having come and gone and the accommodations being made that we've been talking about, it seems highly unlikely that somebody is going to drop out between now and then. And so for that reason alone, I don't think if you're an age group athlete that wants to try their hand at the age group qualifier and is hoping that maybe I can still salvage a backfill spot at the the individual events. Not a great strategy.
Sorry. I'll stop because that was different than what I was asking.
Am I getting off track?
Yeah, I know. I didn't clarify that properly.
Maybe we can edit that one.
Yeah, no, you're fine. But hey, we keep it all in. I love it. I was more so talking about. So say I'm an individual athlete hoping for a backfill to semifinals. And yes. I know that there's, say, like Becca Voigt, for example, that might switch and go age group. If I'm the athlete that's on the bubble, I'm sitting there waiting for a possible backfill invite as the date to go live gets closer and closer, which is a tight turnaround. And my question was, is that just the nature of the game of, hey, you're waiting for a backfill invite, so you're going to be a little inconvenienced? Or is that something where like, hey, maybe we can clean up the timeline a little bit more so the pathways are a little bit clearer sooner? But I guess I could see it either way.
Yeah, fair enough. The schedule is tricky because there's not just the considerations of who's competing when, but from the administrative side of who is resolving these competitions under what time frame. How does that work get done? Mm-hmm. What does the season look like for the team? I mean, these are all things that have to be weighed against each other, and sometimes it's just not possible to accommodate everything. We do live in a constrained universe for for the time being, anyway. And so there are choices to be made there. if you're an individual athlete and you're on the bubble and you think that, yeah, maybe one of these age groupers could drop out and that's going to be my spot in, then yeah, you should stay ready. And I think that is just the nature of the game. You know, it's one of those things that can sound a little bit harsh, but if you really want to secure your spot, you know what to do.
Pays to be a winner.
Yeah, I was going to say,
exactly.
My shaman might disagree about the constrained universe, but you know, that's neither here nor there.
Boz, I know as you guys, you know, now we're almost through quarterfinals. I know you are looking ahead to the games. Like that planning is well underway.
Yes, sir.
What excites you about the opportunity that you are getting now to drive that ship?
Yeah, well, first, you know, man, there's a lot wrapped up in that. I'll say that we had our site meeting in Madison, one of many that we have leading up to the games. Just recently, we were out there taking a look at some things and working through some logistics, and it's awesome to be there, feet on the ground, you know, feeling that venue, feeling some areas around that we hope to kind of utilize this year. And so that's really exciting. It's odd being in the position where I've been involved with the games for so long. I've had a hand in so many different facets of it. Maybe not in such a public role as Dave, certainly working closely with Dave over the years. And the reason I say it's odd is that, you know, I did not expect to have this responsibility thrust on me with Dave getting fired. And obviously, Dave's my friend. He was my longtime coworker. I would have gladly had him around as long as possible. And it's just a little bit challenging to, I don't even know, man, maybe this is not a good thing to put in. It's a little personal. Yeah, that started good, but I don't know if I'm comfortable putting that in. You know?
No, that's fine. No, I appreciate it. I mean, from what I heard, I know you, like you said, you guys had that site visit. I didn't get any specifics, which is good. I just heard that there was a good vibe around it and people were really psyched. So
I can start that section again and not go down that road, but
no, that's all right. I like the genuine response. I think that was good.
Yeah, no, and it's totally fair. And I don't know if this touches on that.
Not how I wanted to get this responsibility. That's the crux.
Yeah, for sure.
No, that's fair. I'm curious because I think one element of now kind of being, you know, at the forefront of the games is, for lack of a better term, the public facing element of it, you know, and I know that's maybe not something that was a regular part of your previous role. And I think that was something that I think Dave was okay with shouldering in small parts and playing that, like, that social media persona and kind of poking the bear and rounding people up and being very, what I would call very Dana White in the UFC type role at times. It just like, and I think that's just part of it. And I'm curious if like that's something that you're actively working on or something that's maybe an area of growth for you that's been outside of your comfort zone to this point.
I mean, there's definitely an element to that, you know, when things are worthy of critique or there is a problem that people have, then yeah, you know, I'm definitely a little bit more in the hot seat than I have been in the past. I have no interest in creating a persona that is, you know, that kind of face of things. Not to say that Dave did that, but it is, I don't know, in my mind, the event and the athlete performances and what these people are capable of should be the highlight. Everything else is just details, in my opinion. You know, there are plenty of ways to structure an event that are awesome, that showcase what these athletes can do, really highlight the abilities that they have beyond the average person. But on the other end of that, there's plenty of great testing to be done for these athletes that are run-of-the-mill CrossFit. And the reason that they're compelling is because you look at how adept these athletes are, not necessarily the challenge itself, or not necessarily the personality wrapped around that challenge. To me, that's really the purity of it. You know, these guys work so hard. They put their lives into what they're doing. They should have the spotlight. That's my opinion on it.
I was going to say, I've always viewed the games and the way it highlights athletes in two forms. And it pertains, I guess, the accessibility of the test. And I'm curious to get your thoughts on it, because I think there's value in highlighting the athletes and their ability to rise to the occasion with the test. And I think there's a value in highlighting the effort that they went into in attempting to rise to the test, even if they fail.
Sure.
And I think both pursuits are equally noble, and is almost, when you combine them together, is almost irrespective of outcome. So I'm curious if that's something that is, in your mind when you're thinking about this, or has been ever present in the minds of designing the test over the last few years.
Yeah, for sure. And I think you have to drill down, what are you talking about? Are we talking about a stage of the season like the Open, which is obviously much different, at least in specifics, from something like the Games finals in Madison? The Open, obviously the philosophy, the nuts and bolts of it, it's still CrossFit. It's still representative of this broad fitness that we want out of people. But you're also balancing that consideration against hundreds of thousands of people around the world doing it. So it has to be a different thing. Once you whittle the field down from hundreds of thousands to tens of athletes, and we're at the tippy top, that's when it's more appropriate to say, okay, how can we stretch these athletes and really see where that upper limit is, and balance that against some of these things that we can all do, but these guys just do it so much better.
Mm.
I take a look at things like the 100-meter dash. I always come back to this as an example. I've said this a bunch of times, and I think it holds true. That's probably the most recognizable sporting event in the history of mankind, next to like fighting or wrestling. That's it. A foot race over a short distance. Everybody, every culture, everybody on earth has that in their roots. It's just part of what we do. And something like the 100-meter dash, people don't show up to see if the athletes are going to make the distance. That's not the question. That's not the compelling part about it. People show up to be like, holy crap, this guy has a rocket ship for legs. That's what I want to see. It's not the event itself that has to be so far out of reach that makes it compelling. And I think that there's plenty of room for that at the Games. Although, like I said, the other end of that is you do want to see some superhuman stuff too. And that's part of it.
Yeah.
Boz, thanks so much for taking the time to do this, man. Really appreciate you shedding some light on the semifinal stuff, and appreciate your candor, and really looking forward to the rest of the season and seeing what you can do with this thing. I know a lot of people are excited about it.
Yeah.
Thanks, man. I appreciate you guys. And I'm really looking forward to it. This event is going to be one for the books, and I can't wait to get out there.
Well, we'll let you get back to your secret lair and think of new ways to be evil to athletes right now.
I like this little nook he's in right now. I can see a little bit.
I retrofitted my garage. I shouldn't retrofit. That's probably not the right word. I outfitted my garage as my primary work station and like kind of creative area. So I got a giant whiteboard over here behind me, or I guess in front of me behind you guys. And, a bunch of gear here. There's a bunch of gear back here that you guys can't see. And there's a reason that the camera is not pointed that way.
Yes. So. We would not want to be responsible for any of those secrets.
Yeah.
So.
I will say that the 100-meter dash thing really reassunates with me, because I was thinking immediately to college with the way we would resolve disputes on runaway evenings of sorts, where if it were, you take it out to the street and you would race to basically see who got the final word in any disagreement. So I definitely feel
we played Street Fighter 2. Street Fighter 2 was a big one.
That's a great way to do it too. Yeah,
I'm not doing the dishes tonight. All right, you're up.
Smash Brothers,
fighting and
Mario
racing.
Kart.
It's the
That's right.
two-time tradition.
Absolutely. Yep. All right, Boz, we'll let you go, man. We really appreciate you taking the time to do this. Take care.
Hey, my pleasure, guys.